Hey, I'm Tamara Kandaker, and you're listening to The Decibel from the Globe and Mail. So with everything else that's been going on, I wouldn't blame you if you forgot about this, but we still don't have a governor general. Julie Payette resigned in January after an independent review into workplace harassment allegations that was triggered by a CBC News story. In that piece, employees accused her of, among other things, throwing tantrums over what she thought was poor work and putting her staff on the spot by asking them to name all the planets in the solar system or state the distance between the sun and the moon. This was a spectacular fall from grace, but when the news first broke about the work culture at Rideau Hall, a lot of people actually put the blame on the Prime Minister. Justin Trudeau was accused of not doing enough vetting to make sure that Julie Payette was the right person for the job. Now might be a good time to start paying attention to this story. Trudeau's about to get a short list of candidates for the next Governor General, and when he was in the UK for the G7, he talked to the Queen to get her advice. So it looks like a decision is coming soon. Kristy Kirkup is a national reporter for the Globe and Mail, and she's been following the search.
There are some who believe that the government should name someone who essentially is not controversial because, again, Julie Payette really became such an embarrassment for the government because of these allegations and everything that happened and the fact that she had to resign in this way.
Kristy and I are going to talk about how the government is looking for the next Governor General, how this process looks different from the last one, and what kind of person they might be hoping to appoint. And if you're like me, you might also be wondering why we still even have a Governor General. So we're going to talk about that too. That's today on The Decibel. So, Kristy, can we start by going back to January when Julie Payette resigned? What was she accused of and why did she resign?
So essentially what Julie Payette was accused of, and this was actually documented in an external report that was conducted by a firm, she was essentially allegedly involved in behavior that involved yelling, screaming, and aggressive conduct, as well as demeaning comments and public humiliations that ultimately resulted in what led up to her resignation. And I mentioned the fact that this was something that was contained in an outside review. And in fact, the whole process cost more than $393,000. And we did see a copy of that report that was conducted, again, including those allegations of humiliation and disrespect.
Mm-hmm. And so how did she respond to the allegations that were made against her?
So specifically, when Julie Payette actually announced that she was going to resign, she essentially said that she was doing so for the good of the country. And essentially as well, she kind of talked about the fact that people experience things differently. So there wasn't a real acknowledgement of this alleged behavior that was documented in that outside report. But again, saying that, she didn't want to see a constitutional crisis. And there was quite a bit of pressure on Julie Payette from the government for her to exit this role because of those scathing findings contained within the review that was done.
Mm-hmm. So how unusual is it for a governor general to resign like this under these circumstances?
It's incredibly rare to have a governor general have to resign amid a scandal after there was considerable pressure to substantiate the allegations that were being brought forward to, a national news outlet, the CBC. And this is incredibly rare. And so that's why the federal government, the Liberal government, is being pressured to get this right. They cannot mess this up because this really went sideways, and they were criticized for not doing their homework about Julie Payette. And again, allegations that this wasn't the first time that she allegedly behaved inappropriately in the context of workplace.
Right. And so tell me more about that. A lot of people blame the Prime Minister for what happened. Why is that? And what went wrong the last time they chose the Governor General?
So, in talking to different people inside government who were involved in the process to name Julie Payette to the role, essentially there was a thinking that they were starstruck by her. She had been to space. She was incredibly accomplished as a former astronaut, and she was bilingual and a woman, and brought forward on paper a number of skills that a lot of individuals do not have. And perhaps that's why the necessary background checking wasn't done when they were looking at her, that at previous employers, there were concerns about her behavior as well. And that apparently this somehow did not come up during the screening process when she was being named to this role. And so there were concerns that were brought about, for example, as a result of when she was at the Montreal Sciences Centre and allegations again about workplace misconduct in that job, as well as details that came out about something that happened in the United States with respect to her striking a pedestrian who ended up dying. So these are some of the things that came out after she was named to this role. And again, a number of politicians, people like the opposition leaders, saying that, essentially more digging should have been done about Julie Payette, and that they were disappointed that the government did not look further into her background, and perhaps this could have prevented what happened at Rideau Hall. I think it's important to keep in mind that there's different considerations that come up when a government is going to name a governor general. People being able to speak, French and English. There are also regional considerations. There are also considerations like for example, during this process, there is talk about whether Canada should have its first Indigenous Governor General. We have not had an Indigenous Governor General in the past in Canada. Another thing that experts have said is that people don't necessarily appreciate or understand, again, what it is like to have someone who's going to have a very outward facing job like this that does involve going out and speaking to Canadians and connecting with them.
So it's been a few months now since Julie Payette resigned, but we're still looking for a new Governor General. So where are we at in the process right now?
There was an advisory group that put together a short list for identifying who could be the next Governor General. And that advisory group had a few different people on it. For example, the rector of the University of Montreal, the former secretary to the Governor General, the president of the National Inuit Organization, as well as the interim chair of the Board of Canada Post. And they have been working again since the spring and have been whittling down a list again that apparently is going to be presented to the Prime Minister very shortly. And essentially, they were submitting a short list, according to a news release, that it will involve outstanding Canadians for the Prime Minister's consideration. There has been some criticism of this particular process because, some people believe that essentially this critical decision is in the hands of a few people, that this perhaps is not the most transparent way to go about naming the next Governor General, to have a short list. For example, Philippe Lagacé, who is an associate professor at Carleton University in Ottawa, has said that he's not really sure what a short list accomplishes other than allowing the government to test the waters. And perhaps this is a bit odd considering, or even off-putting for candidates who are not chosen. But again, there is this short list we understand that will be presented to the Prime Minister, and then ultimately it will be up to the Prime Minister to take this decision. I think opposition parties want to be part of this process, again, really emphasizing the importance of trying to get this right and to ensure that they are brought in as well.
Yeah. And how does this process look different from the time that Julie Payette was chosen? Is it just the fact that it's being done by committee? Is there more background checks and vetting being done to make sure that there are no skeletons in the closet that we don't know about?
We don't have a heck of a lot of detail about what exactly the committee has been doing in the way of the mechanics to look into these different names that are ultimately brought forward. But people would bet their bottom dollar that there has been more in the way of background checking, because again, this need to make sure that things don't go off the rails this time around.
Yeah. So since Julie Payette resigned, we've had an interim governor general, that's Chief Justice Richard Wagner. And it seems like things are going fine with this interim appointment, but I understand that there's some urgency around finding a replacement, a permanent replacement, in favor of this arrangement that we have right now. And why is that?
Because essentially the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Richard Wagner, has a really important job, and that's being, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. This is not his permanent position. He is serving in the capacity that's known as being the administrator. And so, again, he's kind of there, in the interim, but this is certainly not what is intended for the long term. And, again, he's pitching in, if you will, but this can't remain for the future. This is something that needs to be addressed. It is now June. There's some thinking around trying to name the next Governor General maybe before Canada Day. Would that be a deadline, if you will, that the government would kind of have in the back of its mind to name the next Governor General?
Mm-hmm. But I understand that some people are saying that this needs to be done ASAP because there's the possibility of a federal election coming up, and that would put Richard Wagner into a kind of an awkward position. Can you explain that? Why would this be problematic?
Yeah, so essentially the Governor General serves different roles, including dissolving and opening Parliament. So, for example, when it is time for an election, the Governor General starts that process. And when a new Parliament begins as well, the Governor General reads what's called the throne speech, setting out the government's priorities. Mm-hmm. There is concern about having someone who is the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court being involved in such a process with respect to, again, a federal election being around the corner. And they don't want to be putting someone like Richard Wagner in a very uncomfortable position.
Mm-hmm. You just mentioned one of the Governor General's responsibilities in the event of an election. And I wonder if you can talk a bit more about what the Governor General does. Like, my understanding of this role has always been that it's largely ceremonial, that the Governor General doesn't have much in the way of power, kind of like the Queen in Canada. So what does the Governor General actually do?
Yeah, so the Governor General, again, is the Queen's representative in Canada, and beyond the dissolving and opening of Parliament, there are a few other duties. For example, the Governor General is the Commander-in-Chief of the Canadian Armed Forces, so there are military duties there. As well, abroad, Governors General represent Canada at state functions, and at home, they play a role with respect to, foreign leaders who may be visiting, as well as receiving of official documents from new ambassadors. For example, when bills are approved by the House or the Senate, they are assented by the Governor General before they come into force. Mm-hmm. And no Governor General has ever refused such an assent, but that is, again, among their responsibilities. So I know that in the aftermath of Julie Payette's resignation, there were some people who were saying, well, why is it that we have a Governor General in Canada? Well, at the end of the day, we have one, and that is not going to change. They have initiated a process to name someone to fulfill this role. That will be happening soon. Adrienne Clarkson, who also served in the role, I interviewed her after the resignation of Julie Payette, and she was not willing to comment, of course, on Julie Payette's resignation, saying that that was a personal issue. But she did kind of, again, stress that the job is really about connecting with Canadians, and that whoever it is that takes on this new role needs to understand that, because, again, it does come with a lot of scrutiny, a lot of media coverage, a lot of security, as well as, again, essentially having people, know exactly who you are, and, having to go out and to connect with Canadians as part of this role as well.
Okay, so you mentioned a number of different considerations that the government has to make when they are looking for the next governor general or considering people to fill this role. So I guess they have to be bilingual, they have to be really comfortable engaging with the public, they have to not be controversial, and there can't be anything embarrassing in their past. So I'm just wondering, are there any frontrunners right now that you can tell us about? Are there names that you've heard floating around, or are we going to get to see this short list that's being presented to the Prime Minister?
Yeah, that's a great question. And frankly, I don't think we know the answer yet. There's been nothing described in the way of, again, Canadians having knowledge of who is on this list. This is not information that has been shared anyway by the Intergovernmental Affairs Minister, Dominic LeBlanc, who mentioned, again, the fact that there is going to be this short list presented to the Prime Minister. And I also mentioned the fact that there are some concerns about whether or not this is indeed a transparent process, and that Canadians should be brought along more, if you will, in the selection of the next Governor General. There are some who believe that the government should name someone who essentially is not controversial, that is not going to cause the government problems. I'm not saying that's the way it should be. I'm just saying that is something that has been brought up during the course of all of this because, again, Julie Payette really became such an embarrassment for the government because of these allegations and everything that happened, and the fact that she had to resign in this way. So some of the names that have been thrown out, again, although I can't confirm to you that they're even on the list, but for example, Beverly McLaughlin, the former Supreme Court Justice, I interviewed someone who talked about the fact that potentially looking at Beverly McLaughlin, that she would make a superb Governor General in their view, and that they're amazed that they haven't gotten her yet, again, because she is recognized essentially as a national figure, but is not seen as being controversial, for example. But as I say, there are different stipulations beyond wanting someone who's not going to be controversial. Perry Bellegarde has been outspoken about the fact that he believes the next Governor General should be Indigenous. For example, he is leaving as the National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations. That's an advocacy group that, of course, is recognized nationally. And he is going to be leaving his role this summer. There's going to be an election to name a new AFN National Chief. So he's looking for his next step. And some people have suggested perhaps that there would be some openness on his part to perhaps assuming this role. Again, he wants an Indigenous person named to this role. He hasn't said, "Oh, P.S. Please consider me." But some people talking about him, as well as Roberta Jameson as well.
Yeah. And I just want to wrap by asking you about something that you mentioned earlier, which is that when Julie Payette resigned, there were a lot of people asking, why do we have a Governor General? And the fact is that we do. But I want to ask that question again, because I think it's a question a lot of people will have, because it sounds like this person does a lot of things that could be done by a representative of the government. They are expensive and they don't have much in the way of actual power. So why do we need a Governor General in 2021? And is there talk of getting rid of this role? Like, is that even possible? Just wondering what the conversation is around the need for a Governor General at all.
Certainly on the part of the government, there was definitely no talk of doing away with the role of the Governor General. There has been, there are some people, members of the House of Commons even, that are not fans of the monarchy, particularly, the Bloc Québécois, for example. As far as the Liberal government is concerned, they really don't want this to go off the rails because, I would say that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau faced a lot of really critical questions when the resignation of Julie Payette happened, again, because of that lack of background checks. Essentially the question was, did the federal government not do its homework and facilitate allegedly abusive behavior at Rideau Hall? That if you just take a step back and, again, I know that the news cycle has been very intense. And of course, we are all living that in real time. And that's really difficult. But the fact that was a question being asked of the Prime Minister, that essentially did they not sufficiently look into her background and facilitate, again, allegedly workplace abuse, that's a real problem, not only for the government, but specifically for the Prime Minister. So they, I think, will be hoping to name someone to this role that can also perhaps put to rest the questions around why do we have a Governor General. And I think the hope on the part of the government, I'm not speaking on behalf of anyone, but the hope that the government has is that if they can name the right person to this role, this will perhaps instill more trust and confidence in the role of the Governor General itself and why they believe that this is critical, again, for ceremonial reasons, but also for constitutional reasons as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Kristy. I really appreciate this.
Thank you.
And that's it for today. I'm Tamara Kandaker. Our producers are Madeline White and Kasia Mihailovich. David Crosby edits the show. Angela Pacenza is our executive editor. Thanks so much to Kristy Kirkup. You can find her on Twitter at @KKirkup. If you liked this episode, if you feel like you learned something, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. We're a new show, so it really, really helps. If you want to reach us, email us at thedecibel@theglobeandmail.com. You can also tweet me at anima_TK. And most importantly, wherever you listen to podcasts, follow us so you never miss an episode. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.